Hey, so today I'm going to be showing you how I made this procedurally generated world for the game I'm making. As you can see, everything here is made up of blocks, which can be dug up to get materials to sell or build with. Today I'm just going to be showing you how the world building system works. Okay, to start off with, I'd like to just go over the idea of why I did it the way I did it or how I figured out to do this. So to start with, you know for sure that you want the top row to be all grass, right? With dirt on the bottom. Like just a blocks with grass and dirt, just like that, if that makes any sense. And then after that, uh, you know that you want to have like copper in like random locations, right? So here, whatever. And same with iron. Imagine this is iron over here, blah blah blah, just in random places, right? And then after that, you need to fill the rest of it with just dirt. You know what I mean? It just needs to go over and fill everything else with dirt, like this, right? So you have your grass, and then all this down here, right? So that's kind of the way I went about making this, and I'll show you the code now, how I actually did it. Okay, so here we are in Unreal's blueprint editor, which is just Unreal's visual scripter, and it just makes coding a lot easier. So, I know this looks like a lot, but I'm going to do my best to explain what's going on here. So, to start with, I need to explain what variables are. There are a bunch of different kinds of variables, but we really just need to worry about integers and vectors. So, an integer is just a number, a whole number, that can only be a whole number, right? So it can't be 0 point whatever. It can only be like 1 or 2 or 0, right? So that's an integer. A vector is a little bit more confusing, but you can think of it as just a list of numbers. It can be any number, like the list can be however long, but you normally is only like 3 or 4. So in our case, we're dealing with a 3 vector. And typically vectors are used to describe locations in 3D space, which is exactly what we're using it for. Okay, and one more thing quickly that we need to talk about are sets. This little symbol here means to set, and arrays. And this little symbol means arrays. Okay, so an array and sets are basically the exact same thing, but they're a little bit different. So an array is just a list of variables, in our case, vectors. Now, a set is basically the exact same thing, but it's also a list, but you can't have the same vectors in them or same variables. So like if the numbers are the exact same, then it just won't add it to it. All right, now that we have most of the explaining out of the way, I would like to start explaining the code. So this whole chunk here is just to make the top layer of grass in the world we're making. All right, so this node is event begin play, and what that means is when I press this play button up here, it's going to fire here. So it's going to start this node. All right, so what this is as you can see, for loop. So for the index, which is this, so 0 to 100, you can see this number here, it's 100, it's going to fire. So meaning on the first index, that's one fire, and then so 0, and then 1, it's going to fire, and then 2, it's going to do it again, and then 3, it's going to do it again. So really, all this is doing is repeating this code 100 times, which is exactly what I want to do. All right, so what we're actually doing in this block of code is we're creating this top block array, which, like I explained, is a list of vectors. And what we're using it for is to store the data of all the top blocks, all the blocks of grass. All right. So that's what this does. This adds to this set here. So you're probably wondering, how is it that we're even getting the location data in the first place? How are we making these vectors to add to the set here? Well, fortunately, on the for loop node, we have this index. So what the index is just what number of loop are we on. So the first loop would be 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3. Every time it does a different loop, it adds that number. And then, so what I'm doing is I'm taking that index, and I'm turning it into a vector, and then turning that vector into this array. So adding it to the array. Every time the loop runs, it adds one of these to the array. So the first time it runs, it's going to be 0, 0, 0, and then 0, 1, 0, 0, 2, 0, and so on until you get to 0, 100, 0. Okay, so that's how we're getting the data of each location. And since we have that, we can go ahead and spawn it. Oh, that's what this is. This spawns a block for every one of these vectors. So what this node does is it spawns an item that I've created, BP top block, that's the grass, to a specific transform. Transform is all of this, so a transform is just a location, a rotation, and a scale. But we don't need these two because the scale is always going to be the same and the rotation is always going to be the same. The only thing that's changing is this. So we get the index, that goes from 0 to 100, and then we're changing the Y location every time this fires. And the reason why I'm timesing it by 1200 here is because that's just a dimension of the blocks so that the blocks are side by side and perfectly flush. So instead of it being 1, it's just 1200 and then times that by 2, so 2400 and then whatever, you get it. Okay, so that's basically everything that's going on except for the function I created. All right, so what is this and why does it have a very dumb name like add to remove from array? Well, that is because I created it. So functions are just little chunks of simple functions you want done that you know you're gonna have to do a bunch of times. So you make it into a function, so all you gotta do is just do it. It's simple, easy. You'll understand in a second. So keep in mind in this, the items to remove, that's this set right here, right? So it goes from here into here, and then when you go into the array, or the function rather, it this is it here. Comes out here and then goes into this. So what this is it just changes it from a set to an array because this node, the one we're actually trying to do, requires a set and an array. I couldn't tell you why. There's probably a reason, but I don't know why. But what this node is doing, the add items node, is I'm adding items from an array, this, to another array, right? So I want all the top block data location added to this remove from array. That's all that's happening here. That's everything. That's the whole thing. So you'll understand what this is in a little bit. But let's get back to explaining the rest of it. All right, so that's how this chunk of nodes operates. Oops. So that's what's happening. We're storing the location data into an array and then adding that information to this array and then spawning all the stuff, right? All the top blocks. So the idea of how we get the spawn data location is basically the same all the way through. The only difference being that we're not dealing with just one axis. We got to deal with two, right? Because we need to have some depth to be able to go down. With that in mind, the fact that we basically have done all the work, we just need to do a little bit more. Let's move on here. So, what are these? These are other functions I made, and what they do is they spawn the ore blocks, right? So if we go back to this, remember I was explaining we want to start off by putting the top layer in because it's easy. Well, we did that already, right? And then now we want to randomly put in all the different ore blocks. Like this is the copper and this is the iron, right? So that's what these do. And I know that we're always going to be doing that the same. The only difference being maybe like, later on if we were going to have gold, it would spawn even lower. Like, you wouldn't have gold at the top, but maybe you would, but whatever, just as an example. So there's just a couple variables that need to change, but the overall idea is the exact same. So that's what functions are great for, and that's why I made one like this. As you can see, uh, we just have some very simple data here that we need to put in, and then it'll just do it. And I'll explain how this actually works, but so like this is the one that spawns the copper, so I changed it to copper, and then you can change its maximum height and depth of where it can spawn and its rarity, like how much of it is spawned into the world. Let's jump into the spawn ore block function now. So this is it. It's not that complicated. It looks a little bit like there's a lot going on, but it's not that bad. So what we're starting off doing is we're starting off making this new array, right? So if we go back real quick to event graph, you can see copper block array. That's the first time we're using that. So we need to put all the copper block data locations into this, right? Because that you'll see why again, but we need it for later. So let's go back into the event graph. So that's all this is doing, right? So we got a for loop. It's running 2,000 times, I think is what I have it set to right now. That's the rarity. And then from that, we're adding these random integers to it, to that copper block array. So you think of this as just this here. This would do the same thing. It's just that way I don't have to go into the function specifically to hook it up every time. But that's what's going on there. And a random integer, I have a min and a max, right? Remember you see I had earlier the maximum width and depth. So the maximum number is going to represent the maximum how far it can go. I'm pretty sure I have that set to 100. I do. So this is a random number between 0 and 100, and it's the same for depth, I'm pretty sure. 101. Whatever. Close enough. Same thing basically, right? So every time this fires, it's going to come back with a random number of that, and it's going to add it to the copper block array, which is a vector. And like I was saying earlier, explaining vectors, vector is just a list of two numbers. So let's say this one comes back with a random number of 2 and this one's a 3, then it would be 0, 2, 3, right? And like at the very beginning when I was explaining lists, or sets, sorry, sets can't take the same location, same data, same variable. So this is good because when you're doing random, obviously you don't have any control over it. You could very easily get the exact same number. And then when we're spawning the blocks in this location data, if we have the same number, what's going to happen is we're going to have two blocks spawning right on top of each other, which is dumb. We don't want that. So it actually works pretty good in our advantage. Now with arrays, there is add unique, and this does the same thing. So, like I said, how you can't have two the same, when you add unique, it'll check if there's already an existing vector or variable that has that exact data, it won't add it. But remember earlier I was explaining with the add items array right here, you need a set and an array. I don't know why again, but whatever. It just is what it is, and it's fine because it works out for us anyways. It makes it a little easier, I suppose. Anyway, so that's what's going on here. All right, so when this for loop completes, then we're running all this stuff down here, right? So what are we doing down here? Well, we're getting this remove from array, which you remember at this point it's just the top block data locations. So we're getting that, we're turning it into array, and then unlike before where we were adding items to the remove from array, we're actually removing items from the copper block array. Because like I was saying, if we have the exact same locations, uh, then what's going to happen is blocks are going to spawn right on top of each other. Now, what I could do if I wanted to, this is the Z value. So, I could have this at a 1, and I wouldn't need to do that, but whatever. This is fine. It works. I don't care. But you could do that if you wanted. But anyhow, so like I said, this remove from array is removing all the top grass locations from the copper block array. So this way we don't have any overlapping data locations, spawn locations, because we don't want that. We don't want blocks to be spawning on top of each other. All right, so after that, now what I'm doing is I'm adding all those uh, copper block data locations to the remove item array, or yeah, remove from array. That way, when I spawn in something else, then I know not to spawn anything where these are. And it goes on, and you do that every time, right? Okay, and then we're taking this copper block array into this for each loop. So this is a little bit different than the for loop from before. Instead of using the index, like an integer, to specify how many times it runs, what it does is it uses the length of this array, and for every single, so let's say there's 100 points, it's going to run this 100 times. So if there's 100 data locations, it's running 100 times, which is perfect because that's, however many copper block data locations we have, we want to spawn one for each one of those. And then that's all that's doing is it's spawning them at that location. See this node you remember from earlier. And you'll notice that this is a negative. That's just because I want the copper blocks to spawn downwards, not upwards. And that's it. That's everything that's going on inside this function node. And then we return once it's done. We come out of this node, right? The return node just leaves, goes back to the event graph, and then goes into this one. Now, I could show you the inside of this, but it's literally the exact same. I mean, we just went over it. So that is what's going on there. So by the time we're done this, by the time we've done both of these, the copper block and the iron blocks are all spawned into the world and their locations are saved. Not only, uh, so like just the copper blocks data location saved in that array and just the iron in that array. And from the remove from array, it'll be these locations and these locations and the top block locations. That way we know in the future we do not want to spawn anything in those specific locations. Alright, so now that we're spawning all the copper blocks, all the iron blocks, and all the top blocks, all we have to do now is spawn in all this dirt here, right? We just need to spawn these in, and then the whole thing will be created. So the way I actually went about spawning all the dirt in is I first make the data locations in this way, right? So like this point, then this, and I do all that, and then once that loop completes, I just move down one, right? And then do this, and then so on until all the way it's all filled in, all the spots are filled in. And if you remember, the remove from array are all the locations of the copper and the iron and the top blocks. Well, I just removed that from this new array I created, the dirt array, and then we're left with just the exact points that we need to fill the dirt in. So I'll show you that here in Unreal. All right, so how are we actually doing this? So we have a for loop that starts this, and then what it does is we have this integer that starts at 1, so we don't even spawn. If it was at 0, it would be trying to make locations for the top dirt, right? The grass. But since it's 1 below, and it just starts where all the ore blocks are created, right? So it starts at 1, and then uh, we have the maximum width, which was 100, and it runs that 100 times, and then it adds it to the dirt location array. And then once it completes, what this is, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's if you just press plus plus when you add it, yeah, increment add, increment int. So what it does is it takes this dirt loop handler or slash dirt actual depth, whatever, and then adds one to it. So it started at one, then it's two, like I was explaining earlier. And then it goes over and then it checks to make sure that the dirt loop handler isn't greater than the maximum depth. Because otherwise, if if we didn't have this check here, it would just run on indefinitely and it would never stop. So if it's true, if this is less than 100, 101, then it will if it's less than 101, then it reruns the loop, right? So like I was explaining before, it goes here and then down one and then down one all the way to we're at the maximum depth and then we're done, right? So now that it's completed, it's this is false. This is no longer less than 101. It goes down here. And we do, you remember this kind of setup here, we're basically just taking the remove from array and removing it from the dirt location array. And then we're adding those locations. We don't need to because it's all done now, but I just, whatever. My brain wanted to do it. We add it to the remove from array. And then once that's done, we take the dirt location array and spawn it into the world. And then what you have is it all working. Everything spawns in. Actually, wait, hang on. I'll play it here so I can actually zoom out. And then there you go. There you have it. That's how it's all created. All right, a couple cool things to note about this is, hang on a sec. So since we already have all this accurate representations of all the locations of all the different blocks, we can very easily use this data for other things. The only thing I can think of right now would be like making a mini map for the game or whatever. But there's probably other things you could do with it. But we have it if we need to, and it's always going to be exactly accurate. Now, as well, we have since we have these, it's super easy for me to add in a whole different type of block. So, let's say I want to make gold or whatever, I'd have to make the textures and the item for it, but whatever, you just imagine I did. I'd just put that item here, I'd make a new array for the gold, you know, and then, set these to whatever I want them to be. And then that's it. And then it works. It's super easy. Instead, like if I didn't have this function, I'd have all this out here, let's say whatever it's down here. I'd have to connect it all and like try to figure out what's going on and all this every time I come in. No, with the function, you literally just bam, that's it, it's done. You just put this in and you set it up. And it's as easy as bam, doing that. Wrong one, but you get the gist. Yeah. Well, I hope that was helpful to some people, maybe. Mostly, I mean, I kind of do this for me too, so I can like remember if I need to in the future because I have a shit memory. Oh, and one more thing, if you were trying to make this for something like Minecraft or whatever, well then you would only need to add one more axis, right? So like, for this, you know how we added one, we made that whole row of one. Well then what I would do is once this had completed, then I would add a number to another integer. I'd make another one of these. Just imagine this is a different variable and then add one to that once this is done and then do it again. And then once that got to however long I wanted it, you would have a cube, right? And it would be in the three different axes and that would be it. And there'd be a little bit more like you'd have to add one axis to all of these obviously, but the general idea is there and you'd be able to figure it out pretty quickly. So yeah, that's it. I think that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching if you did, and if it helped you, let me know, I guess, or don't. I don't care. And that's it. Yep. Bye bye.